A hospital orderly cut one song and it became the most played love song in America. A swamp blues riff turned a jukebox into a movement. A thunderstorm at a Memphis motel wrote a chorus before the songwriters did. 12 records, one unforgettable year. This is Groove Lens, and this is the sound that owned 1966. Let's count them down.
This is a man's world.
Number 12, Baby Scratch My Back by Slim Harpo. Before there was funk, there was this. A slow, loping groove built from almost nothing at all. A lazy tremolo guitar lick, a woodblock shuffle, and a harmonica moan that sounds like it's grinning at you from across the room. Slim Harpo was a Louisiana bluesman born James Moore, and by 1966, he'd already spent over a decade grinding through juke joints and roadhouses across the swamp circuit before this record even existed. He cut it down in Crowley, Louisiana, with producer J.D. Miller, the same small studio where he'd made his name for years without ever cracking the mainstream. And here's the thing. Baby Scratch My Back is barely a song at all in the traditional sense. It's mostly instrumental, Harpo talking his way through the verses more than singing them, letting that chicken scratch guitar do most of the emotional work. That looseness, that unhurried confidence, is exactly why it worked.
You're doing a chicken scratch.
The record climbed to number 1 on Billboard's R&B chart and crossed into the Pop Top 20, becoming the biggest hit of Harpo's career.
Show knows how to scratch.
Musicians overseas had already taken notice of him. The Rolling Stones and the Kinks had been covering his songs for years. Picture a roadhouse jukebox in the Louisiana heat, condensation running down a bottle, somebody leaning against the wall, not dancing exactly, just letting that beat walk straight through them, one slow shoulder roll at a time. That's the whole record, distilled into a single image, patient, sly, and impossible to shake. What makes the story stick is how unlikely it all was. Harpo wasn't chasing the pop charts. He was a working bluesman in a small southern studio. But something about that unhurried groove translated everywhere it landed, proof that a great feel doesn't need a great budget to travel. Number 11, A Sweet Woman Like You by Joe Tex. Joe Tex spent years grinding through the Chitlin circuit, playing to rooms that barely noticed him, before Nashville producer Buddy Killen finally cracked the formula that would define his career. Half sermon, half seduction, all Southern soul.
The things that a man is supposed to do. I know.
A Sweet Woman Like You opened the year sitting at number 1 on the R&B chart. A warm, horn-driven groove built around Tex's conversational, almost preacherly delivery.
Woman, tell me, where did you learn?
He doesn't just sing to the listener the way most soul singers do. He talks to them, cajoles them, teases them out of their doubts, the way a great Sunday morning storyteller works a congregation into leaning forward in their seats. That talk-singing style, part testimony and part flirtation, became Joe Tex's signature, and it set the template for the bigger, even more successful crossover records he'd land later in the decade. Producers around Nashville and Memphis started chasing that same conversational intimacy in other artists, trying to bottle whatever it was that made a listener feel like Tex was speaking directly to them and nobody else in the room.
To make you really see.
In January of 1966, though, this was the record leading the pack, holding down the very top of the R&B chart as the calendar turned. It's proof that a singer who talked as much as he sang, who treated a 3-minute single like a late-night conversation between two people who already trusted each other, could still take the entire chart by storm. Sweet, patient, and just a little bit sly, exactly like the woman the title describes. Tex had bounced between labels for the better part of a decade before this run of success. Killen's answer was simple. Stop trying to out-sing everybody else on the radio and just talk to the listener instead. That patience paid off, turning a journeyman singer into one of Southern Soul's most distinctive voices. Number 10, Let's Go Get Stoned by Ray Charles. By 1966, Ray Charles didn't need to prove anything to anybody. He'd already redefined what soul music could even be. Gospel fire fused with blues heartbreak, R&B swagger dressed up in orchestral clothes, a sound so singular that entire genres would spend the next decade trying to catch up to him. Let's Go Get Stoned was written by the Motown songwriting team of Ashford, Simpson, and Armstead, and had already been recorded once by another artist before Ray Charles got his hands on it and turned it into something entirely his own. His version is a big band horn-punched groove, his voice riding right on top of the arrangement, equal parts joy and unmistakable ache underneath the surface.
Now wait a minute.
The song rode all the way to number 1 on the R&B chart, becoming one of the most enduring and beloved hits of Charles's later career, a record that still fills dance floors decades later.
Now listen.
And underneath that party-ready title sits something a good deal more complicated, a song fundamentally about drowning your sorrows that somehow still makes you want to get up and move anyway.
Ain't no harm.
That contradiction is very, very Ray Charles. Take the deepest pain a person can carry and dress it up as the best time in the entire room. Nobody else could pull off that particular sleight of hand quite like he could, turning heartbreak into a party you'd want an invitation to, horns blazing the whole way through.
Ain't no harm.
By this point in his career, Charles had already crossed over from R&B into country, into jazz, into orchestral pop, refusing to stay inside any single lane.
Everything I try to do.
Let's Go Get Stoned was almost a homecoming, proof that a master at the peak of his powers could still take a song written for somebody else and make it sound like nobody but him could have ever sung it.
No.
Number 9, Love is a Hurtin' Thing by Rawls. Music. No idea what it took to make them. Groove Lens digs that history back up, one record at a time. The subscribe button costs nothing, and it means you won't miss the next one. Number 8, Knock. This one was born in a thunderstorm. Eddie Floyd and Stax guitarist Steve Cropper were holed up at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, the same building that would later become tragically famous, trying to write something suitable for the label's rising star, Otis Redding. A summer storm rolled through outside their window, lightning cracking over the parking lot, and Floyd started remembering childhood nights back home, hiding under the bed, while storms just like it rattled the windows. That memory became the hook. It's like thunder, lightning, the way you love me is frightening. Stax boss Jim Stewart almost passed on the song entirely, convinced it sounded too close to Pickett's earlier hit, In the Midnight Hour, which Cropper had also helped write. He sat on the finished recording for months before finally agreeing to release it. When he did, it shot straight to number 1 on the R&B chart, propelled by Booker T, and the MG's locked-in, unshakable groove and horn stabs sharp enough to feel like the thunder itself rolling through the speakers. Floyd and Cropper had to hit the road themselves after release, visiting radio stations in person to push the record before it finally caught fire nationally. It became one of Stax's biggest and most enduring hits of the entire decade, a song that's been covered dozens of times since, and it all started with 2 songwriters staring out a motel window, watching a storm roll in and turning what they saw into 3 minutes of pure soul. There's a bittersweet irony underneath it too. The song was originally intended as a gift for Otis Redding, Stax's brightest rising star, before the label decided Floyd deserved his own shot at it. Redding died the following year without ever recording it. The song meant to launch one soul giant ended up immortalizing another instead. Number 7. 634-5789, Soulsville, U.S.A. by Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett didn't really sing. He shouted, he testified, and he dared you to try and keep up with him. There's a raw, almost violent urgency to his voice that few other soul singers of the era could match, a sense that every take was a fight he was determined to win. Written with Steve Cropper and cut at Stax with Booker T. and the MGs driving behind him, 634-5789 turned a simple 7-digit phone number into one of the most iconic hooks of the entire decade. The horns hit like a starting gun right out of the gate. Pickett's voice tears loose almost immediately, and the whole record just barrels forward from there, refusing to let up for even a single bar. It spent 7 consecutive weeks at number 1 on the R&B chart, the single longest unbroken run of any song that entire year, longer than anything from Motown, longer than anything from Stax's other big stars. Pickett was already one of the hottest and most explosive names in soul music at that point, and this record only tightened his grip on the genre even further, cementing him as one of the era's defining voices. Picture a phone booth on a Saturday night, somebody scrawling that number onto their palm in ballpoint pen before the song has even finished playing on the jukebox behind them. That's the kind of hit this was, instantly memorable, built from the ground up to be shouted along to at full volume, in bars and living rooms across the entire country. Pickett recorded much of his best material working with the Stax House Band, even though he was signed to Atlantic. An arrangement producer Jerry Wexler brokered because he knew Memphis had a sound New York couldn't replicate. That partnership is all over 634-5789, tight in a way only a road-tested band could pull off. Number 6. Get Ready by The Temptations. Motown's hit machine ran on precision, and in 1966, no group inside that machine ran hotter than The Temptations. Written and produced by Smokey Robinson, Get Ready opens with one of the most explosive intros in all of Motown history, a full band blast that sounds less like a song starting and more like the whole group bursting through a locked door.
If you wanna play hide and seek with love, let me remind.
Eddie Kendricks takes the lead vocal with that gliding, weightless falsetto of his, while the rest of the group stacks tight harmonies underneath him like a wall slowly closing in around the listener. It climbed to number 1 on the R&B chart and quickly became a blueprint for the kind of up-tempo, kinetic Motown sound that would go on to dominate dance floors for years afterward. The Temptations went on to have an absolutely extraordinary year in 1966. 4 separate number 1 R&B singles across those 12 months alone, more than any other act on the entire chart, Motown or otherwise. Get Ready was the record that kicked that historic run wide open, pure kinetic energy pressed directly onto vinyl and handed straight to America's dance floors. There's a reason this song still shows up on party playlists 60 years later. It doesn't build slowly or ease you in. It just detonates from the first second, and by the time you've caught up, the Temptations are already 3 steps ahead of you, harmonies stacked and moving in perfect formation. Robinson had already proven himself one of Motown's sharpest writers with the Miracles, but Get Ready showed a different side of his instincts, pure, unfiltered momentum. It became the opening shot in the Temptations' most dominant chart year, a group hitting its absolute peak in real time. Number 5, Hold On, I'm Comin' by Sam and Dave. Sam Moore and Dave Prater didn't just sing together, they preached together, trading lines back and forth, like two voices arguing their way toward the exact same truth from two completely different directions. Hold On, I'm Comin' was written by Isaac Hayes and David Porter, the songwriting team who would go on to define much of the Stax sound for the rest of the decade. According to studio legend, Hayes and Porter landed on the title almost by accident. Porter had ducked into the studio bathroom mid-session. Hayes reportedly shouted for him to hurry things along, and Porter called back that he was coming. That offhand exchange became the entire hook of the song. The record hit number 1 on the R&B chart and became Sam and Dave's defining signature song, driven by the full Stax horn section at absolute maximum force and that relentless call-and-response urgency that would make the duo soul legends for the rest of their careers. Every phrase Sam throws out, Dave answers, and every answer only raises the temperature in the room another degree. It's less a love song, honestly, than it is a promise. Total commitment, zero hesitation, delivered at maximum volume with a horn section that refuses to let the energy drop for even a second. Decades later, it's still one of the most sampled, covered, and instantly recognizable grooves to ever come out of Memphis, a record built entirely around the simple, urgent idea of showing up for somebody. What set Sam and Dave apart from nearly every other duo of the era was that neither man ever sang backup. They were both leads, trading the spotlight bar by bar, pushing each other louder, until the record felt less like a studio take and more like a live wire. Number 4, It's a Man's World by James Brown.
This is a man's world.
By 1966, James Brown had already reinvented rhythm and blues once, with Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. This time around, he slowed everything down, almost to a crawl, and reached for something closer to gospel than funk.
But it wouldn't be.
It's a Man's World strips away the relentless rhythmic drive that had defined Brown's sound and replaces it with sweeping strings, a mournful horn line, and Brown's own voice, cracking open with raw, unguarded emotion, in a way listeners simply hadn't heard from him before.
To take us over the road.
It's a ballad fundamentally about power and loneliness, about how little any of it actually means without love standing beside it. A startling pivot from the man who just built his entire name on relentless, unstoppable rhythm.
To take us out of the dark.
The song became Brown's second number 1 R&B hit of that same year, proving he could dominate the chart in 2 completely different modes within the same 12 months, one built for the dance floor, the other for standing perfectly still.
And a baby boy.
Where his up-tempo records demanded you move your feet immediately, this one demanded the exact opposite, that you sit still, hold your breath, and feel every single word land.
And out the man make everything he can.
It remains one of the most covered, sampled, and referenced ballads in American music, a reminder that the godfather of soul could break your heart just as easily as he could get you up and dancing.
You know that man makes money.
Brown was famously a control-obsessed bandleader, finding musicians for the smallest missed cue, but this record required something different from him: restraint. He had to trust the space between phrases, trust that silence could carry as much weight as any horn stab. It's a giant of rhythm choosing, just once, to let the rhythm rest. Number 3. Reach Out, I'll Be There by the Four Tops. Few Motown records hit as hard or as fast as this one does. Written and produced by the legendary team of Holland Dozier Holland, Reach Out, I'll Be There opens with a flute line that sounds almost otherworldly, floating alone for a moment before the entire arrangement crashes in behind it. Pounding drums, shaking tambourine, strings stabbing like sirens cutting through city traffic. Levi Stubbs doesn't so much sing the lead vocal as wrestle with it, his voice straining hard at the edges like it's about to break apart entirely from the sheer emotional pressure underneath it. That tension is the whole point of the performance, a promise of unconditional support, delivered like a man fighting with everything he has, just to hold himself together long enough to make it to the end of the song. The record became a global smash, topping the R&B chart and the pop chart at the same time, and remains one of the most recognizable Motown records ever made. A tight 3-minute pop structure carrying an emotional weight that feels almost too enormous to fit inside it. 60 years on, that flute intro still stops people in their tracks the instant it starts playing. It's become shorthand for a very specific kind of desperate devotion. The promise that no matter how far someone falls, somebody else will already be there, reaching, before they even have to ask for help. Stubbs almost didn't get the lead at all. Holland Dozier Holland had considered the song as a possible fit for the Supremes, before deciding it needed a voice with more grit. Stubbs, whose natural range sat lower than a typical pop tenor, had to reach for notes right at the edge of his ability, and that visible strain became the record's defining signature. Number 2. You Keep Me Hangin' On by the Supremes. By late 1966, Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, and Florence Ballard were the biggest female group in the entire world, and Holland Dozier Holland handed them a record engineered from the ground up to match that enormous scale. You Keep Me Hangin' On opens with a jagged, insistent guitar figure that mimics a Morse code distress signal, a small, deliberate touch of studio genius that turns the entire song into a kind of alarm bell ringing before the first verse even starts. Ross's lead vocal rides right on top of it with a restrained, controlled urgency, never quite breaking down completely, even as the lyric describes a relationship visibly falling apart in real time, line by line. The record hit number 1 on both the R&B chart and the pop chart simultaneously, becoming one of the most enduring, most influential songs to ever come out of the Motown era, and one of the group's most covered and sampled records in all the decades since its release. Its tension itself turned into a dance groove, genuine heartbreak that somehow still makes you want to move your feet, which might just be the single most Motown trick in the entire playbook. The Supremes closed out 1966 as the undisputed queens of the chart, and this record was the proof. A song about being trapped and unable to leave that somehow became one of the most liberating, danceable hits of the entire decade. Behind the scenes, tension inside the group was already quietly building, with Diana Ross increasingly positioned as its singular face. None of that friction is audible on the record itself, though. Just 3 voices, 1 guitar hook, built like an emergency signal, and a Motown machine at the absolute height of its powers. Number 1. When a Man Loves a Woman by Percy Sledge. Before this song existed, Percy Sledge wasn't a professional singer at all. He worked the fields around Layton, Alabama, then took a job as an orderly at Colbert County Hospital, singing with a local group called the Esquires, only on weekends. The song came together almost by accident, built from a lyric Sledge had written and music from two of his bandmates, Calvin Lewis and Andrew Wright, a debt Sledge acknowledged by giving them full songwriting credit. It was recorded at a small studio in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, a scene just beginning to become one of the most important recording hubs in American music.
If she said that's the way it ought to be.
There's a strange footnote buried in the record's history, too. The mastering engineer accidentally used an early take with horns that drift slightly out of tune, and nobody ever fixed it. That small imperfection became part of the record's aching human quality. Released in April of 1966, When a Man Loves a Woman became the first #1 pop hit to ever come out of Muscle Shoals, and it topped the R&B chart for 4 consecutive weeks. It went gold, the first for Atlantic Records, and turned a hospital orderly with a weekend band into a soul legend overnight. Here's the part that makes it heavier. Sledge toured behind that one song for the rest of his life, well over 100 shows a year for decades, and by his own account, never wrote anything else that reached that same height again. He didn't vanish. He built a genuine 50-year career and earned a spot in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But everyone who ever saw him live knew exactly what they'd come for. He passed away in 2015 at the age of 74, but on any given night, somewhere in the world, that mournful organ intro is still playing, and someone is still standing perfectly still, listening to a hospital orderly from Alabama explain exactly what love costs.